Good evening, football fans, and thank you for joining me to the inaugural debut of the Commanders Gridiron. I'm your host, Steve Lockman, and I'm actually rounding out the NFC East shows here on the Out of the Box Sports. So tonight we're going to tackle the Washington Commanders. As you know, the Commanders have done nothing short than dominate the NFL headlines over the last 2 weeks. Typically, as we're going into training camp season here, there are a lot of discussions about who's been drafted, who's going to be playing, who's battling for positions, depth charts, etc. But here in DC, it is all about the sale of the team. But before we get to the sale of the team, I just want to introduce myself a little bit. I am sincerely humbled, proud, and excited to join the platform here with these fine ladies and gentlemen that provide the shows. As I said before, my name's Steve. I am a diehard Washington Commanders fan. Up until this year, with our recent birth of our little baby girl, Lila, I was actually a season ticket holder for the last 5 years. And when I'm not doing full-time firefighting in the DC metro area, where I've been for the last 22 years, I actually do sports autograph memorabilia on the side for the DC, predominantly the DC market, predominantly the Washington Commanders and Washington Capitals, with a little other guys mixed in there. So I do have some interactions with some of the players on a personal level, outside of the field, outside of the complex. So you'll hear some references and conversations with some of those guys as well. As always, this show is geared towards you, the fans and the listeners of the DC market. So feel free to comment. Feel free to drop a question, a thought, something you want to know about. I'll do my best to try and answer it if I know it. And that kind of guides the conversation and helps the hour go by a little bit quicker. So, as always, hey, thanks, Evan. I appreciate it. We're going to see how this goes with the first episode of the Commanders Gridiron. So let's get right into it. So, as we all know, Dan Snyder, who was probably the worst owner in NFL history, out of the 32 teams that are there, was basically, let's call it as it is, forced to sell the team after 24 years of ownership. This guy bought the team in the mid 90s for approximately $600 million. Had great vision, and wanted, had a process for where he wanted the team to go. Unfortunately, probably the biggest thing that he gets caught up in is twofold. A, he's trying to run the team like a fantasy football team. Doesn't work. And then between investigation after investigation, he's sinking his own ship. So I don't like to talk about Dan very much because we all want to move into the future. But let's just recap what Dan Snyder has done over his 24 years of ownership. So I'm actually going to correct myself. He paid $800 million for the team, and he actually just sold it to the Josh Harris Group, which we'll go over and talk about here in a couple minutes, for $6.05 billion. Over that span, it was 386 games. And, as fans of the Commanders, we know a lot of those weren't winning seasons, very few playoff appearances, very few playoff victories. So therefore, the team amassed a 164 and 220-2 record over that time. What kind of stands out from that, I kind of just alluded to, throughout that cycle of 24 years, Washington went through 10 head coaches. We only had 6 playoff berths. What is kind of surprising in that 24 years, well, I guess 24 years, so it's a quarter. We had 6 playoff berths. Um, and then that's kind of where it stops from there, right? So, from there, it's everything that happened off the field, which kind of mired the team, then became the largest distraction for all the players, the coaches, the staff, and everybody in between. So then Mr. Snyder proceeds to get himself involved in 4 federal investigations, at least 2 NFL investigations that we know of, the Beth Wilkinson investigation and the Mary Jo White investigation, which I'm going to hit on in a little bit that a lot of people don't know about. Um, each jurisdiction in the DMV investigated him as well. And we've gone through 3 team names, possibly a 4th, depending with the new ownership. One of the biggest things that, as we try to sustain consistency in, the new ownership, is players, winning culture, and finding that prize quarterback, right? So one of the biggest stats that jumps out at us always is, in that tenure of Dan Snyder, who, uh, according to multiple NFL coaches, past head coaches for the Redskins, Washington football team, and Commanders, Dan Snyder basically made his own draft picks. We went through 27 quarterbacks in that time period. But enough about Snyder. We're moving on. It's the greatest day of the world, on July 20th of 2023, when it became official at approximately 4:45 p.m. Eastern Standard Time that the team was sold to Josh Harris and company. For a lot of Commanders fans, the biggest question was, who is Josh Harris? Josh Harris is actually a DC native. Grew up in Chevy Chase, Bethesda area, right outside of DC, down where I work. And basically, he paid the record price of a little over $6 billion for the Washington Commanders team. He actually is currently the owner of, or I should say part owner, of the Philadelphia 76ers, the New Jersey Devils, through the Harris Blitzer Sports Entertainment Group. He also is a general partner at the Crystal Palace Football Club, which is an English Premier Soccer League team, as well as a minority stakeholder in Joe Gibbs Racing. So this guy is pretty invested into the sports network, right? I know we got a lot of people logged in, watching the show. So one of the things that I've, kind of, as I've been doing my research about Josh Harris, and kind of figuring out who Josh Harris is and what makes him tick, right? So as we kind of keep talking about Harris and the partners that he brought with him, I want to ask people that may be in the Philadelphia area or fans of the 76ers, the New Jersey Devils, etc. What is Harris like? Feel free to drop a comment. Feel free to throw your thoughts out there. Kind of let me know from your perspective as, a fan of a team that Harris owns, what Harris is like. With that being said, we're going to keep going. The initial bid from Harris had approximately 30 partners in the bid, along with Harris being the majority owner. The majority owner at the time, he was only around like 20% ownership. I thought that was really strange and kind of unheard of, that, an owner, a guy who's going to be an owner for the face of the franchise, only owned 20% of the team. So as the bid makes its way through the NFL Finance Committee, they have to do background checks and basically look at and do homework on every partner listed. A couple things jumped out at them that the NFL Finance Committee didn't necessarily like. So, to us DC fans, are like, oh man, this sale's not going to go through. But you got to have faith with the process and how it works, the bid process, as well as, just the NFL Financing Committee saying, hey, look, we want to get it done. The NFL wants to get it done. It'll happen. So a couple bullet points for the NFL Finance Committee when they brought back an amended list of things that needed to be done in order for the Harris bid to go through. The first off was that the majority owner, Harris, had to take a 30% stake of ownership minimum. So then, therefore, that means that Harris is now going to have to limit the number of partners that he can have down from 30. The NFL minimum is 25. The ultimate bid ended up being at 20, and we're going to cover who those partners are. Some bigger names, some guys and families of, smaller notoriety, so to speak. The other thing that they wanted to do was maximize the amount of debt that this group was going to be carrying. Apparently, NFL guidelines set the maximum debt limit at $1.1 billion of debt for an ownership going in. And basically, they wanted more equity in the purchase of the team and less debt. So basically, your debt to equity ratio was going to be a little more inverse than what the Harris Group had actually put it in. But needless to say, those items got worked out. In 2 hours and 45 minutes at the owners' meeting in Minnesota, the owners unanimously voted 31-0 to approve the sale of the Washington Commanders from Dan Snyder to Josh Harris. So where that takes us from there is actually pretty cool turn of events, so to speak. Basically, Josh Harris was in Minnesota for the press conference, the opening press conference with Roger Goodell, announcing him as the new owner of the team. And one of the local DC sports shows, 106.7 The Fan, put together basically a giant party at 2 locations, at the the old Ox Brewery, and the place called the Bullpen in downtown DC. One thing that I thought was really awesome, of course, this was going around social media like wildfire. At approximately like an hour and a half after the sale of the team, the introductory press conference was done in Minneapolis. Josh Harris calls into the local radio station to say hello, basically, greet the fans, some of the players, stuff like that over the airwaves. And when he's done, he does something that you would never think of to happen from an NFL owner, much less never come from Dan Snyder. Josh Harris proceeded to buy everybody at the old Ox and the Bullpen a beer. They figured out that roughly came out to about 3,000 beers. And Josh Harris even joked that he was going to have to dig into his savings account to tackle that cost. But, have no fear. It's all good. Everything's going to get covered. So with the Josh Harris Group, like I said, there were 20 limited partners that are coming in some capacity of ownership with Josh Harris. So who are those people exactly? Basically, it's a bunch of businessmen in the DC area that have ties to Josh Harris in one way or another, childhood friends, business partners on other ventures. Currently, individuals that wanted to be involved in knowing that this was going to be basically a historic and monumental occasion to basically rebuild a storied, historic NFL franchise, hopefully back to glory. So, without further ado, a lot of those guys and families are the following. So like Andy Snyder, Eric Schmidt, the Santo Domingo family, Doug Osterver, Morgan family, Mark Lipschitz, Michael Lee, Eric Holman, Lee Ansley. Those are kind of like the ones that, most people are like, who? They put some kind of a stake into the team. The ones that we kind of know a little bit more about are Mark Ein, David Blitzer, who was part with Josh Harris in the Philadelphia market, Philadelphia, New Jersey market. Magic Johnson, NBA Hall of Famer, former Laker great, and as well as a guy named Mitchell Rales, who's a DC area Bethesda billionaire, who's actually going to be playing a big role that we're going to get into here in a little bit with the team moving forward. So I think looking at this group right now, the three prominent people that you're going to see coming out of this ownership group is obviously going to be Josh Harris, the managing partner of the Washington Commanders. He's going to be the guy doing the press conferences. You're going to see him, out with the fans, doing, trying to bring back that connection between the fans, the players, and the team. I'll get into it in a little bit, but I saw that Mitchell Rales is now being the one being tasked to lead the limited partners, the other 19 people. And his task is basically going to be charging forward with trying to get a new stadium deal done. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Last but not least, Magic Johnson, right? A lot of people ask, what does Magic Johnson bring to the table? Personally, I saw that Magic Johnson is now a limited partner, minority owner in about 4 to 5 different professional sports teams. So he brings that business acumen, not just from a business perspective as part owner of a sports team, but also as a former player in a professional league himself, right? So the gentleman knows what players expect. And then he can also flip that around and know the business side of how to be successful with your teams. Most notably, I think, he's a minority owner in the Los Angeles Dodgers. And he's also a minority owner in some of the other championship teams out in LA that have recently been very successful. So hopefully that can translate into his time here at DC. I can honestly tell you that, excuse me, that Magic Johnson is excited about being in the DC market. I didn't know this until recently, but he actually has a lot of significant ties to the DC community. I personally envision Magic Johnson being involved in more of the community relations, team culture side of things from the ownership group than anybody else on that list that I just read off. Basically that's the political schmoozer, the, jovial guy who is out mingling with fans, connecting with fans, trying to improve the fan experience, which we all know needs to happen at FedEx Field before the new stadium gets happening. So it's, something that, is very welcome to us fans that have been around for a long time in DC. And yes, it is absolutely great to have a minority owner like Magic Johnson to try and bring that winning culture to the DC area. I mean, let's be honest. Aside from a little bit, the Caps are always popular in DC. Nationals aren't doing too great. Commanders, let's be realistic, are usually 3rd or 4th in the NFC East every year. Every once in a while, they'll show a glimpse of brilliance, win the division or finish 2nd. But we're pretty much at the bottom until we can, get that culture change that we need, along with the sustained winning, to propel ourselves to the top of the division in the NFC East. So moving along from that, one of the things that was kind of buried in the whole sale of the team was the release of an investigation, actually the second investigation by the NFL that a lot of people don't know about, a lot of people never heard of. We all know the Beth Wilkinson investigation. In all honesty, one of the things you're going to find from me as we do this show throughout the season, I'm going to call it as I see it. There's not going to be any punches pulled. If the team sucks, I'm going to say the team sucks. If a player had a bad play, had a bad game, you're going to hear about it. We'll give out, the good praise. We'll give out the bad boos where it is. But, one of the things I think the NFL really messed up on, there was no release of findings for the Beth Wilkinson investigation. I honestly, as I sit here, think that had there been a public release of that investigation, the Snyder sale would have been a lot sooner than where we currently are. Um, Something kind of just eeks of, kind of smells really fishy um, with the Beth Wilkinson investigation, whether that was, damning information to other NFL owners, whether that was, more damning circumstances to the team itself, and obviously Dan Snyder. But for whatever reason, none of that was ever made public. He was suspended for a year. Okay, whatever. They threw his wife in place to run the team. Um, Not that that really makes a difference, but nothing ever came out of it. However, going forward, right before the sale of this team, excuse me, right before the sale of the team, there was another investigation by Mary Jo White, who was an independent investigator appointed by the NFL. And one of the things that was buried in all of the, excitement and, historic occurrences of an NFL team being sold was the release of this Mary Jo White report. And basically, in 2022, the NFL commissioner, Mr. Roger Goodell, told Miss White to basically investigate and to review the NFL team, the Washington Commanders, for financial misconduct at the club, as well as allegations of misconduct, improprieties, financial improprieties, and treatment of former employees of the Washington Commanders. So basically, what that came out to was a 17-month investigation that concluded with dozens of interviews of players, team staff, former employees as well, a review of over 10,000 documents, forensic audits for financial purposes, yada, yada, yada. The list goes on and on. So two big things came out of that. One, Dan Snyder was slapped with a fine. I mean, in all honesty, when you just make $6 billion off of selling your NFL team, is the fine really going to hurt? No, it's just more of a principle, but they fined Dan Snyder $60 million. That was number one. Number two, Ms. White did conclude that there were substantial findings for violations of the workplace in Washington, or more purposely in Ashburn, Virginia, where the team is headquartered. So I'm going to read a little blurb real quick from the NFL commissioner's statement. Basically says the conduct substantiated in Mrs. White's findings has no place in the NFL. We strive for workplaces that are safe, respectful, and professional. What Ms. Johnson experienced is inappropriate and contrary to the NFL values. She was one of the main complainants that perpetuated this investigation, along with the financial improprieties of the team. That was number two. Number three, and finally, it was found that the team, led by Snyder, had actually withheld over $300,000 to $400,000 of funds that were to be submitted to the NFL for the shared revenue that goes back into the pot of the owners to get distributed. And I think that's kind of where, between all three things of, treating your employees shitty and harassing them and having a hostile work environment, the financial impropriety, as well as some of the other things, that's where the $60 million fine came from. But as I said, we're done with the Snyder era, finally. So what can we expect from the Harris Group? One of the first things that Josh Harris said in his press conference the following day at a team pep rally at FedEx Field on that Friday afternoon was, in fact, improvements that they're going to do to the team. He talks all the time in his press conferences and tells us exactly what we want to hear from a new owner, right? But after 2 decades plus of dealing with Dan Snyder, The fan base in DC wants to see physical, tangible results, right? Whether that's winning on the field, whether that's a better fan experience at FedEx Field, whether that is better amenities at FedEx Field, a new stadium plan, new practice facilities or upgraded practice facilities in Ashburn, Virginia, or all of the above. I can tell you right now, this new ownership is going to check every single one of those off the box, starting with the fan experience and your visit to FedEx Field. What does that mean? How does that translate? Here's 2 points. One, within 72 hours after the initial announcement that Josh Harris Group bought the team from Dan Snyder and the sale was final, ticket sales soared for the home opener week 1 against the Arizona Cardinals. I guarantee that that stadium will be sold out. It'll feel like a home field advantage. It'll be a lot of burgundy and gold, and the fan experience will definitely be better. Why do we think it'll be better? Josh Harris came out and said, look, we got to work on the little things that people come to the stadium for. He went down so much as to say, look, we're going to fix the broken couches. We're going to make sure the toilets are working. The plumbing's getting fixed, so the fans ain't got shit running down on them in the middle of the game. The railing's going to be fixed so they're not falling on our poor Eagles players that are coming in to visit and play the game when they're walking off the field. So basically, they're going to pump almost $100 million into FedEx Field over the next couple of years. So that's the first thing. Second thing is they're going to improve the practice facilities in Ashburn, Virginia. One of the things that we kind of always knew with Dan as he's basically out the door is the fact that, Dan's not going to put money into anything, right? I mean, he's not even putting money into signed players for signing bonuses. So why is he going to put money into FedEx Field? Why is he going to put money into Ashburn, Virginia? He's not going to do it. The lease at FedEx Field, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, runs out in 2027. So essentially, we only got 4 years left at FedEx Field anyhow. Any owner who knows the lease is only 4 years away isn't going to dump $100 million ballpark into a stadium to refurbish, to give the fan the experience and the comfort that they need to watch the games that you're putting on and make you money. So, it's definitely another aspect to watch out for. A couple other things about Josh Harris before we move on. Part of Josh Harris's ownership group is that he's a minority stakeholder in Joe Gibbs Racing. One of the things that was really interesting about that was that all took place in late 2022 to early 2023. So basically during the bidding process / sale process of the team. I don't know what the percentage is that he bought of Joe Gibbs Racing, but we all know that Joe Gibbs is a Hall of Fame coach, has a lot of ties to, the team and the franchise, obviously. Be completely honest, over the last couple of years, the relationship between the team and the owner, the former owner, has been very strained to the point that you haven't seen a lot of former players and even coaches. Every once in a while, Coach Gibbs will make an appearance. But Coach Gibbs and a lot of prominent team alumni and Hall of Famers were at the press conference and introduction press conference on Friday and Saturday here in the DC area to welcome Josh Harris and that group. You probably saw him on TV, led by Coach Gibbs. Darrell Green, Hall of Fame cornerback, wide receiver, Hall of Famer Art Monk, Gary Clark, London Fletcher, Fred Smoot, all these guys are now tied into the team. So I think you're going to see that moving forward. You're going to see a lot of the alumni. You're going to see, Coach Gibbs, even though he's super busy with his NASCAR race team based out of Charlotte, North Carolina, he's going to be active in this franchise moving forward in any capacity that these gentlemen can, which only means great things for us as fans and a fan base as we try to bring back this once great franchise that we knew and grew up with and loved. Um, you know, Josh Harris said that there's a list of so many things that he needs to do, um, that they're going to get them all done. It's just a matter of them prioritizing which ones they're going to do, which ones they're going to do first, um, and kind of go from there. But they know that there's a lot of work ahead of them, as well as just like I said, finding out what currently works, what currently doesn't work, and that's everything from on the field and off the field. So, kind of as we move away from Josh Harris for a little bit, let's talk a little team football as we're going there. Um, we had the NFL draft earlier this year. Commanders drafted 16th in the first round, which good, bad, or indifferent kind of seems to be where they're always drafting every year. Right around in the middle, 16, 18, 20, something like that. But this year in round one with the 16th pick, they took Emmanuel Forbes, a cornerback out of Mississippi State. Actually, the good thing about Mr. Forbes, he just signed a 4-year deal, fully guaranteed at $15.4 million. He's 6 foot tall, little speed demon, runs a 4.3 40. Had the most interceptions last year in Division I football. Ball hawk, good route reader, good coverage guy. The question that remains with him to be seen is his size. Even though he is 6 feet tall, he's only 166 pounds. Quite honestly, I guess in today's world of supersized wide receivers and tight ends that you could be covering as well. That kind of makes a little bit of a mismatch. So it's going to be interesting to see how he does. Let's be honest, when you draft the first 1 to 3 rounds, you're expecting those guys to make the team big, be an impact player. And as we get to it in a little bit, there's a good possibility for him to be starting. I don't know if he'll be starting week 1, but he'll be starting at some point in time in the season. And we'll see how things go for him. Round 2, they drafted once again at number 16, and they picked up Jartavius Martin, who is a safety out of Illinois. Kind of surprised everybody that they went back-to-back with defensive picks. Let's be honest, the Commanders had a lot of needs going into the draft, anywhere from, offensive line, linebacker, defensive help with safety, cornerback. If you really want to get picky, they could draft a tight end too. So there's a lot of needs for them to address. It's just a matter of who they're going to pick in what order to kind of help fill some of those holes. But they think they did that with Martin as safety in the second round. He just signed his 4-year deal, $76 million, $5 million of it guaranteed. He's 5'11", not too shabby, right around the height of Darrell Green. At 194 pounds, little speed demon as well, as he ran a 4.4 40 at the NFL Combine earlier this year. We definitely need some safety help, so it'll be interesting to see how he fits into the mix of Jack Del Rio's defensive scheme. One thing that I can say for Del Rio, he definitely got better last year as the season went on, adjusting his defense to the player personnel that he had on the field. One of the biggest things that we got frustrated with as fans, and I know he had to get frustrated as well, was when we had William Jackson III that used to play for Cincinnati. That dude is a straight up dog when he's playing man-to-man coverage. And for whatever reason, Del Rio just doesn't like man-to-man coverage. So he was throwing Jackson into so many zones, rollovers and coverages that just didn't suit Jackson. So what did that mean? That means Jackson gets burnt. Jackson ain't good on the coverage. Jackson ain't covering the routes right, et cetera, et cetera. And ultimately, William Jackson leaves, goes to a team that has a better fit for him. And we're back to square one with, hey, we need more cornerbacks and safety help. In the third round, We picked up a gentleman by the name of Ricky Stromberg, who's a center out of Arkansas. I think all their schools in the Midwest there are big, meaty guys. So hopefully this dude comes in with a little rendition of the former Hogs. I haven't seen too much of this guy, but hopefully he helps us out for a little bit of depth. We released our center, who was Chase Roulier. Now I had to think about that for a second, mainly for injury and cap reasons. So we'll see how Stromberg plays into that. Worst case, he's going to be a backup lineman that provides some offensive line depth if he doesn't start at all either. Round 4, we picked up Braden Daniels, offensive guard out of Utah. Round 5, we did KJ Henry. He's a defensive end out of Clemson. Clemson is a great SEC, actually ACC school, who is known for putting out some good defensive linemen. As you know, the Commanders have an awesome defensive line, front 4, front 7-ish. So I see KJ Henry, if he can make the squad, providing that depth. As we all know, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, Montez Sweat and Chase Young are on their last year of their contract deals. So, where KJ Henry might play into that, we shall see. Round 6, they did Chris Rodriguez, who's a running back out of Kentucky. This one's, I guess, more of a depth practice squad type deal. We got a stout running back field in Antonio Gibson, Brian Robinson, and Williams. So we'll see how this young kid fits in. Like I said, I see him probably being a practice squad guy if he can make the team. And good luck to him and put your best effort forward. And in the last round, round 7, we did Andre Jones, outside linebacker out of Louisiana Lafayette. I don't know too much about this kid, other than the fact that we need linebacker help. So we lost Cole Holcomb, one of our studs in the center, to the Pittsburgh Steelers in the offseason. We have Jamin Davis returning, who's each year getting better and better. However, he had a minor knee surgery a couple months ago in the offseason. So he's still getting back to 100%. So will he be ready to go 100 at training camp here at the end of the week? We shall see. But if Jones can sparkle, make some heads turn a little bit, he can join Cody Barton and Jamin Davis as a linebacker on the team. And that basically recaps the NFL draft that the Commanders pulled off this year for 2023. And as we talk draft picks, one of the things that, I knew we were going to cover a lot of time on with the team sale and ownership and blah, 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 is obviously training camp. We're not going to dive into too much of training camp tonight as far as position battles and depth charts and stuff like that. We'll probably dive wholeheartedly into that next week. We'll have a good week of training camp under our belt to do that. Excuse me. But some things that we need to address are newcomers and guys that were released. So, unfortunately, we lost about 10 guys, some of them decent to good. Some of them, cap casualties, and some of them just shit the pot last year. So probably the most notable, we lost last year's quarterback, Taylor Heineke. Heineke wasn't necessarily looking to leave, but Heineke didn't get the deal he thought he needed to stay. So therefore, he signed a deal in the offseason to become the Atlanta Falcons quarterback, or at least open that competition down there with Desmond Ridder. So I don't know if Heineke is going to be number 1 or number 2 going into the season, but at least he gets that shot somewhere else. I can tell you that, in having some conversations with Heineke off the field, Heineke loved being in DC. He loved everything about DC. A lot of the things that happened last year, especially with who played when and in what games, especially towards the end of the season, was purely political on the team, as well as upper management owner decided. I'll leave it at that. You read between the lines. It wasn't necessarily a Rivera or Scott Turner decision. You kind of get what I'm putting out. The second departure of the off season was Carson Wentz. In all honesty, that was a cap move. Saved us $18 million in cap space by getting rid of him a year early. I know there's a little bit of dead cap space carried over into this year, but not very substantial at that. Carson was brought in last year basically to provide the bridge until we could find a franchise quarterback. Carson started off pretty decent, but unfortunately hit like a 3 to 4 game skid that the team wasn't able to dig out of as him as a starting quarterback. So then we went into the quarterback carousel. Heineke, Wentz, throw in some other people, back to Taylor or back to Wentz. And that's kind of how we finished the season. And then with Sam Howell, who we'll get to in a little bit. We also released running back J.D. McKissick. That was unfortunately, that was medical related. McKissick had a substantial neck injury that he just wasn't able to recover from to allow him to become a contributing part of the team. Cam Sims signed an off-season deal with somebody else. Can't remember who. We lost him. Wes Schweitzer, offensive guard. Trey Turner, offensive guard. Chase Roulier, who was the starting center. He was a cap casualty as well. I kind of thought they were going to bring him back, maybe rework his deal a little bit. The cards just didn't fall that way. Linebacker John Bostic did a decent job. Wasn't anything to write home about, but gave you the presence in the middle that you needed. Coverage ability was a little shaky from here to here from time to time, but put some good performances together for the defensive group. The big defensive loss, as I alluded to earlier, was Cole Holcomb. Pittsburgh Steelers snatched him up. They're going to be getting a decent to solid linebacker for their group there. Holcomb basically roamed the middle, and he did pretty good in coverage as we're going into that passing friendly league with less running. And then safety Bobby McCain was also the last one that basically left this year and was one of our key departures. So as we talk about departures, we talk about additions. Just take a little break from the talk and the discussion. I am happy to be here as the last member of the NFC East, Washington Commanders. We have a great platform of shows. So if you're not a Commanders fan, feel free to look at this schedule, find your team, find your league. We got something for everybody. So I am doing Commanders Gridiron on Tuesday nights at 6:30. We have a Cowboys show that is at 9:30 on Wednesday nights. We do pregame, postgame for all three, the Eagles, Giants, Cowboys, Commanders on Sundays. We have the Philly squad on Thursdays. We have the Giants group show on Monday nights. So, look at this list, find what you need. We have the shows for you. We have wrestling, we have gaming, we have college football, we have fantasy football. We have it all. So, just look up what you need and we will accommodate you the best we can. So as we kind of go into one of the two last segments here, as we wind down our show for tonight, I'm looking at some basically storylines, things to watch going into training camp. Like I said, not necessarily going down to the weeds of who's battling who for what position, but the story headlines.
The Giants back.
Every team has it. Going into training camp, what are the big topics? What are the hot issues? What to look for going into training camp. And Washington would certainly not be immune to that, as we know. So one of the biggest things we had in our off season was the addition of the offensive coordinator, Eric Bieniemy from Kansas City. A lot of speculation surrounding why he left Kansas City. When they're on the dynasty run with Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, and everybody else, with Andy Reid at the helm. Why would you want to come to basically a bottom feeder in DC with the Commanders and run that offensive scheme? Honestly, I don't know. I would have stayed in Kansas City as well. Maybe this is what Bieniemy needed to finally get himself over the hump to become that head coach in the NFL. The guy is interviewed for multiple positions every offseason. Every offseason, never gets that offer. Ron Rivera is in his last year as his head coaching contract. So does that mean the new owners are going to go away from Ron Rivera and try to bring in their own coach? Does Bieniemy shine as the OC this year and get that opportunity that he's always been looking for? And he's already here, so they just plug him in as the head coach. That remains to be seen. But that's probably one of the biggest storylines going into training camp is Eric Bieniemy and what he's going to do. Second storyline, quarterback. As I read off before, in the last 24 years, we've had something like 27, 30. I don't even know how many freaking starting quarterbacks we've had. Too many to count, too many to list, and it'd take me all night. But they think they found their quarterback in Sam Howell. Sam Howell was a fifth-round draft pick from the University of North Carolina. Go Tar Heels. I'm a Tar Heels college basketball fan. That they drafted last year. And I'll say team management, as in Ron Rivera, Martin Mayhew, the GM, and now Eric Bieniemy as the offensive coordinator, seem to put their basket of eggs at the feet of Sam Howell. Sam Howell had one start last year, Week 18 versus the Dallas Cowboys. I know there's a lot of Cowboys fans in here, but let's be honest, he did pretty decent. That decent performance against the Cowboys Week 18, regardless of how much the Cowboys were really playing or who they were playing as far as personnel in Week 18, resulted in a Commanders victory in Week 18 under Sam Howell. Now, was that a big enough sample size to basically crown Sam Howell, the next, franchise quarterback? No, it's not. Me personally, I think your sample size needs to be at least 4 to 6 games. So he's got at least the first quarter, 25% of this opening season in 2023 to prove that he's the real deal. He's got the arm. He's got the acumen, a little bit of mobility, a lot more mobility than Carson Wentz did. Not quite as much mobility as what Taylor Heineke did. So he's kind of in the middle. He's got a rocket for an arm. The dude can throw the rock, which, as long as our receivers can stay healthy this year, between Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Curtis Samuel, and Diami Brown, all 4 of those guys stay healthy and can produce, you're looking at one of the top 10 receiving corps in the NFL. Not the NFC East, in the NFL. Terry McLaurin gets overlooked every single year as one of the better wide receivers in the NFL. Why? Because he's going through a quarterback carousel, behind center every game, every year, but the dude's still putting up over 1,000 yards a year all the time. So the question is going to be, who's our long-term quarterback? One of the additions that they brought in was free agent quarterback Jacoby Brissett. Now, they kind of told Brissett up front, hey, look, here's the deal. We're bringing you in. Technically, you're going to be on the paper as QB2. Sam Howell's going to be QB1, but there's going to be an open competition in training camp. Now, how much of training camp and preseason is there going to be a quarterback competition? We shall see. Ron Rivera used the term quarterback competition last year, and it was pretty much Carson Wentz all year long. So, let's just say it's basically Sam Howell's to lose. And, unless Jacoby Brissett goes lights out and balls to the wall in the preseason and proves that, Sam needs to start on the bench learning some more, Sam Howell's going to be the guy. and it's a lot of pressure on. Let's be honest, basically a rookie. Who basically only has one game into his NFL resume. You know, so it makes a lot of pressure. It puts a lot of stress on Hal and the coaching staff to see if he is the franchise quarterback. Because let's be honest, you either pulled a gem and groomed him for a year from the fifth round last year to be your franchise quarterback, or at the end of this year, we're jumping back into finding that franchise quarterback um, to be to lead our team consistently year after year, like a lot. Well, let's be honest, the other 3 out of 4 NFC East teams have, and they're starting quarterbacks. Let's be honest. One of the reasons that they can consistently put winning to semi-winning seasons together is they have their franchise quarterbacks. Whether you like them or not, whether they're consistently productive, Dak Prescott, Daniel Jones, and Jalen Hurts are franchise quarterbacks for their respective teams, and they're good at what they do. We need to find that quarterback. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. And right now, I haven't seen anything that changed yet. Third string QB3 is Jake Fromm. You might know Jake Fromm. He was quarterback at the University of Georgia's. Go Dogs. So right now he's going into camp as QB3. He'll probably be retained as the practice squad guy, or even now that they changed the NFL rule about how many quarterbacks can dress after last year's NFC Championship game debacle with quarterbacks. I wouldn't be surprised if he makes the team and then basically just dresses as that third emergency quarterback on a weekly basis. The next storyline to watch is offensive line. Our offensive line has always been shady, suspect might be the better word at best. Every once in a while, we'll throw in an all-pro, a pro bowler, but we can't surround the entire offensive line with the same quality of guys like that. What do I mean by that? We had Trent Williams for years. Trent Williams is a future Hall of Famer, absolutely killing it out in San Francisco right now after a dispute between him and the general manager at the time. Trent Williams should still be here playing for us on that left side, but it is what it is. But then again, we had Brandon Scherf, played on the right side. That dude's killing it in Jacksonville right now, guarding for Trevor Lawrence. So who do we have now? Probably a bunch of no names. Couple guys that are decent, can put out some, 16, 17 game seasons for us. We did bring over Andrew Wiley, offensive tackle from the Chiefs. It's funny, but I was kind of hoping, kind of like a lot of fans, that a few more Kansas City Chiefs players might come over with Bieniemy, but only 2 came, Wiley being one of them. We did sign center Nick Gates. Nick Gates is a veteran in the NFL. I think he's going to be right now projected to be our number 1 center, probably with the rookie at number 2. We also picked up a defensive lineman in Abdullah Anderson and linebacker Cody Barton from the Seattle Seahawks. But offensive line is going to be one of our biggest concerns. If we're going to help make Sam Howell productive, we got to have a stout offensive line. Last year, our offensive line gave up 48 sacks last season, putting them at 26th in the NFL. Basically, anytime you're in the bottom third to bottom 10 in the NFL, that's not good news, okay? That means changes are going to be made. Guys are gone. You're bringing in new people, maybe some new coaches, of which they did replace their offensive line coach as well. I'm not sure who they replaced them with. But, changes are coming when you're in the bottom 10th, of the NFL for that. But hopefully some of these free agency signings on the line and some of their draft picks gives them a good combination for what we need this year. Some of the other subplots that we're looking to talk about going into training camp, last but not least, is our defensive line. Probably one of the most underrated defensive lines in the NFL. You got some monster beasts up front. Let's be honest, defensive ends, Montez Sweat, Chase Young, we'll talk about a little bit more in a minute here. But then you got in the middle, you got Jonathan Allen, and as well as Deron Payne, who just signed a massive $90+ million deal to keep him in town for another 4 years. Those four guys are stout. They drafted a rookie last year. I think he came out of Alabama, last name of Mathis. Guy got hurt. But until he got hurt, he basically was crushing it as well, rotating into that front line for the Washington Commanders. Now, where the question marks come up for this defensive front is the following. Montez Sweat and Chase Young are both on the last year of their contract deals. Basically, the Commanders already came out and said they weren't going to exercise the fifth-year options for either of them. Putting Chase Young basically, in a show-me season. He's missed 22, I guess it's 22 straight games from his knee injuries. So, what kind of year is Chase Young going to have? You don't know. Is he 100%? Is he 90? Is he going to be a glimpse of what he did his rookie season? What's he going to do? I personally think he's going to ball out. I had a conversation back in May with Jonathan Allen. Jonathan Allen didn't want to put a whole lot out there directly publicly. It's literally just me and him and another individual having this conversation. But if you read between the lines of what he was saying and put some of the references together, number one, he was super excited because this was like 3 days after the announcement that the Josh Harris bid was selected. This was like 2 months ago, probably. He was super excited. If that's even the minimum amount of emotion that I could put to him, ecstatic, whatever adjective you want to use, that the team was being sold. As he said at the press conference on Friday for the owners, he's waited 7 years for the fan base to be this happy and finally be the fan base that it can be again for the team and the players. And he said that basically 2 months ago to us in that room when we were doing his autograph signing. I asked him straight out about Chase Young because at the time was OTAs. Chase Young was a no-show at OTAs, all of them. They weren't mandatory. So basically, the thought process was, hey, as you're going into a contract season, why would you not be at OTAs? So I asked Allen straight up, all those guys talk all the time. We all know they do. So, hey, how's Chase Young? How's the knee? Is he rehabbing? Is he out showboating? Like, what's this cat doing, right? And Jonathan Allen looked at me and he's like, I'll be completely honest with you. He goes, I talk to Chase Young at least once a week. The dog is putting in his time. He's putting in his training. He's putting in his reps. He's going to be back to 100% by the beginning of the season in week 1 against the Arizona Cardinals. And I was like, that is awesome. Now, he said, are you going to see the same Chase Young that you're going to see from the Defensive Rookie of the Year campaign? Maybe, maybe not. He's learned a lot in those 4 years playing, there for a while. I think he kind of took it for granted in year 2 how good year 1 was, right? Trying to manhandle people, not really focusing on the technique, not really, being a team player. And you saw that in the games. And even in some of the press conferences that Jack Del Rio did, you knew that he wasn't happy with Young. Now, couple that with the campaign that Montez Sweat put together last season at the other defensive end. And I think you have some serious motivation for Chase Young to put together a great season on the edge rushing for the Commanders front line. I would not want to be management when we get to halfway through the season or the end of next season, and you got to figure out how you can re-sign both or even one of those two cats to a contract extension to keep them in DC. Unfortunately, one of them is going to be leaving. The problem is going to be which one is it going to be? At this point in time, I honestly don't know. If Chase Young can put together a season that Montez Sweat had last year or better, I see Young being re-signed. If Montez Sweat can double that campaign, basically 2 years in a row as last year's, then I see them signing Sweat and letting Chase walk. Strictly business decisions, right? I mean, I'd love to sign both guys, but I know that's not going to happen. Um, so we'll see what happens there on the defensive line. Some of the things that have kind of been interesting the last 2 days as I've been prepping for tonight's show. Players going, players coming. We got rid of Andrew Norwell, offensive lineman, started 16 games for us, basically a cap casualty. Iffy on the mobility. He did play 16 games, couple penalties here or there, that cost us, yada, yada, yada. But they released him. One of the things that was kind of interesting as we wrap up with about 5 minutes to go here for tonight, Washington signed a kicker today, which was kind of weird, right? Who signs a kicker a day or two before training camp, especially the Commanders? Joey Sly didn't do bad last year. Look, he's not a Justin Tucker. I'd love to have a Justin Tucker, but ain't nobody a Justin Tucker. So, having that being said, I think Sly still made like 60 to, I want to say even like 75% of his kicks last year, which is like top 10, top 15 in the NFL. And I would take that. He didn't really miss too many that were game changers. Certainly the 3 points, here and there would help us out. But let's look back, if the offense can score more than 20 points a game, I wouldn't be relying on Joey Sly's leg to make 6 points a winning score every week. So, but anyhow, we signed kicker Michael Badgley. Badgley spent a lot of his time with the Chargers, and then most recently, I think it was the Lions. So now there's competition for kicker going into training camp. That'll be interesting to see what happens, because one of the problems, and this is kind of like, is Badgley really the best guy we could sign for training camp? Badgley doesn't do very well with kickoffs. And now I get it that the NFL is trying to, change the rule, and they're trying to change kickoffs and all that good stuff. But Bagley's only had 12 touchbacks out of 74 kickoffs. That's literally like, what, 10%, 20%? In this day and age, kicking the end zone or, kick it down there so that it ain't getting returned. But we'll see what happens. I know sometimes teams will use kickers and punters kind of interchangeably, blah, 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 blah. But Tressway is punter only, our team MVP, Tressway. We joke about that all the time. But Tressway doesn't do kicking. He doesn't do kickoffs. That dude just boosts the ball down inside the 20-yard line all the time, and life is good. Another training note going into training camp, I kind of alluded to it earlier, but Jamin Davis, he was suspect as a rookie. Kind of got thrown around playing outside linebacker and middle linebacker. They kind of interchange them depending on what package we're in, going into the nickel so much, blah, 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 blah. He had a knee procedure done earlier this spring, pretty minor. I think it was just scoping some stuff out. But he reported this weekend with the rookies and quarterbacks. So we'll see what kind of camp he puts together. And as I alluded to earlier, we signed 2 Kansas City players. One up until recently was yesterday, I think it was, or this morning. Byron Pringle, who was a wide receiver for like 3 or 4 years with Eric Bieniemy out in Kansas City. The dude didn't put up too many highlight stats, so to speak. But it reunites him with offensive coordinator Bieniemy after he was with the Bears, I think it was last year. Last year, he only did like 135, 300 yards and like 2 or 3 touchdowns. He's basically more of like a special teams guy, punt returner, kick returner. He could make the team as wide receiver number 5 or 6. Like I alluded to earlier, I think the top 4 are already locked down. Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Curtis Samuel, and Diami Brown. So those 4 are kind of locked in. One thing that'll be interesting to watch, kind of circling back, it all goes full circle, is the relationship between Brown and Howe. They played ball together at Carolina, so it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. So last but not least, before I wrap things up for tonight on our inaugural show, I always like to try and do a couple team notes, little team tidbits going into this season or beyond for our team. Um, so we have $11.5 million in cap space left for this year. So that definitely gives us an opportunity to see what may be out there for veterans that get cut during training camp, or if we're looking for depth at more positions. We got a pretty good, like I said, we may need some more depth on offensive line. I think there's 17 guys for offensive line going into camp. But most of those guys get relegated to the practice squad because they're just not good enough. And then we carry, I don't know, like 8 to 10 for the offensive line going into the season. So we got almost $12 million to work with, and that was after Norvell's release yesterday, which leaves us about almost $80 million in cap space for 2024. One of the nice things with the new ownership is that we can go out and sign free agents. Hopefully, with the new ownership, new culture, new plan, free agents will be attracted to DC. And kind of, let's be honest, nobody was going to be signing free agent contracts to come play in DC with Dan Snyder. As fans, we knew that, so we kind of just relegated to the fact that we're stuck like this year after year. Let's put the best team we can out on the field, throw the dice out there, see what happens, give me a 500 season, and we'll call it a win. As I alluded to earlier, one of the biggest offseason additions was Eric Bieniemy coming from KC. New stadium deal. The team had in 2022 April signed a purchase option agreement for like 200 acres. I think it was like $60 million in Prince William County, south of Woodbridge, off I-95. Personally speaking, there's only two places that the new stadium needs to go. Option A, our old RFK in DC, blow it up, tear it down, build a new stadium, and the stuff around it, you're good to go. Option number 2, tear down FedEx, leave it in Landover, build the new stadium in Landover. Other than those two options, there is no other option to me. So we'll see what the politicians want. Former DC Mayor Vincent Gray came out the other day, said all stadium options are on the table as far as DC is concerned now. I can tell you that is a 180-degree turn from where they were even a year ago with Dan Snyder. Maryland, Virginia, and DC basically all turned their backs, said, we're not giving you a deal. We're not giving you any tax breaks, whatever you want to talk about. Go find land, go build your own stadium. The lease at FedEx runs out in 2027. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Do they do kind of like the Oakland Coliseum and Raiders did, where they find some land? We're not changing cities, but do they need to extend the lease at FedEx for another year or two until they can get a stadium built? They've already come out and said that the new stadium will be a dome, and kind of go from there, which kind of makes it really nicely attractive now because, DC is probably one of the top 5, if not in the top 10 markets in the NFL in the country. Putting a dome in DC would definitely bring DC into the Super Bowl rotation. I know that they had seriously looked at DC one time, like 5-6 years ago, as a Super Bowl option, but that threat of cold, inclement weather scared them away. So we'll see what happens. The good news, going back to this possible stadium search, Mitchell Rales, who's one of the limiting partners, who will kind of be one of the 3 faces that I talked about earlier, is leading the stadium push. He basically came out in an article the other day, The Athletic, Bleacher Report, somebody somewhere that I read, credible source. He basically said, we're starting from scratch, everything's on the table. So we'll go from there. Last but not least, the biggest talk is possible rebranding. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on rebranding. If you talk to me personally, you kind of know my thoughts about rebranding. My thought process is, look, first off, number one, the Redskins aren't coming back. There is a small group, what I think is a small minority, that, they are thinking that now that rebranding is on the table that the Redskins name, logo, whatever is coming back. It's not. Um, and kind of like Sean just said, you know, are they going to change the name? I have a feeling they might. I'm not a big fan of it. Um, I don't want the fourth name in 5 years, 6 years, whatever this has been. Um, whatever. But I can see the argument being made that they want to get completely out of the Snyder umbrella. And if we take that 100%, excuse me, in that direction, then the new ownership will rebrand. I think there's a lot of things that they can do. New stadium deal, new fan experience, new events, activities, whatever, to re-engage the fan base into the team and the franchise with alumni that's now coming back, current players, and stuff like that. And obviously, let's be honest, if the team starts winning and puts together a 10-12 victory season, is anybody going to really care if they're called the Commanders or need to rebrand? No, they're not. So we'll see what happens. It's probably something that's going to be touched on every other week, every month, on the show. And we'll see what happens with the rebrand, if that gains any traction or not. I agree, Leland. The defense better be top 5, with as many picks as we spent on 4 straight first-round picks for the defensive line. I'm going to tell you, man, it's all going to come back down to whether or not the secondary can be good. We know the front 4 is good, but it's going to be, what the back end is. You can put studs up there, 4, 5, 6 in the box, but we're in a pass-happy league. And if you ain't got the back 4 or 5, 5 predominantly when you're running the nickel, over 50% of the time, it's not, you're going to blow all that talent up front. But we'll see what happens. But it's all going to go back to culture. And Ben's absolutely right that this is literally going to come down to what the culture is going to be like for our team. I think Ron Rivera, given his limitations with Snyder, Scott Turner, and even some of the GM overturn between Bruce Allen and now Martin Mayhew, has done a tremendous job. The record on the field doesn't necessarily indicate that, but if you ask any diehard fan or season ticket holder, the culture has definitely shifted or is beginning to shift since Ron Rivera was hired as head coach 4 years ago. Guys are buying into the system. Guys are buying into that change. And Ron Rivera even did a press conference this afternoon, leading into the opening of training camp. I was able to catch it briefly before I came on tonight. He's excited. He's fired up for the opportunity to see what this new culture change is going to do because of this new ownership group that's coming in. It sounds so cheesy and dumb, but you provide the culture, everything else will kind of fall in place. Lastly, our team, whether we want to admit it or not, has the 8th toughest strength of schedule in 2023 based off of the percentages in 2022, right? This is a daunting stat, and it's going to be interesting to see how we do later on, maybe like week 2 or 3. As we get closer to the end of the preseason, we're going to do a full season preview, kind of see what I think, we're going to do for wins, losses. That 8th toughest schedule is reflected, right? So that, 6 games against 2022 opponents were all playoff teams. And that's literally a 6-week stretch between week 7 and 13 of the season that we play 6 teams that went to the playoffs in 2022. And that doesn't include all the games that we play against our division, 2 against the Cowboys, 2 against the Eagles, and 2 against the Giants, which are always going to be difficult games regardless. So we'll see what happens. We do play on Thanksgiving Day again, 4:30 Eastern. I'd love to go to Dallas and see that game. Not sure it's going to happen, but who knows? stranger things have happened. Um, Luckily this year, good, bad, or indifferent, maybe it'll help us with the primetime jinx. We got one primetime game, week 5, against the Chicago Bears, Thursday night football. I'm not necessarily a fan of Thursday night football just because of the shortened weeks, but whatever. It's our only primetime game this season, so we will see what happens. As always, we will gladly jump into anything Commander related. Hopefully, now that we got the ownership and the team sale out of the way, we can start talking about football, training camp football, preseason football. Talking about our opponents. You will find on this platform with out of the box sports. We trash talk each other. Myself, against the Dallas guys, against the Giants guys and gals, as well as the Philly squad. I don't want to say we hate each other, but there's that professional dislike between fan bases. So you will definitely probably even see us jumping on each other's shows from time to time, kind of doing some previews, kind of doing some recaps as we go through the season as well. I'm definitely going to be having some guests on once I get accustomed to doing the show and how things run and getting a fluid pattern down. What we're talking about, what we're doing. So you'll see some guests from time to time. It just won't be me up here spouting my mouth off for an hour. But like I said, I'm excited to start this show, start this season, have this opportunity here with you all. Thank you for joining me tonight. I look forward to seeing you all next Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. Have a good evening, and God bless.